Take us back to the early days of this pandemic and let our audience, Governor, into the pressure someone in your position is under. Also, let's face it, there's plenty of things you don't know. And you don't know that you can trust the initial data that you're getting from China. You have, on the same day that the president is shutting off travel to China, you have the World Health Organization tweet out that China assures us there's no human-to-human transmission of COVID-19. So, I mean, there are so many variables going on right now, but yet you came back to this state to be its governor because you believed in the discipline, the character, the integrity of the people, and yet there's a lot of pressure right now to lean on them in ways where maybe you don't trust them, and government's got to intervene instead. And most of the other states around the country chose to go down that road. Walk us through your decision-making process in those early days.
Well, it was probably back in January where we were hearing about this virus and learning about it. I started studying and watching other countries, their response, some of what the health experts were telling us. I opened an emergency operations center then and started to really gather information with my health officials, but also other members of my executive team. We had our first cases in March, about March 10th. And that was really when we saw it kind of escalating across the country. But I think the difference is that, I put a lot of time into not just speaking with my state health department, which was incredibly wonderful throughout the entire thing, but also with sitting on phone calls across the nation with doctors and state epidemiologists and other departments of health, just listening in. I don't think there was any other governors on a lot of those calls. But I wanted to learn as much as I could personally about the virus and how what we knew about it was changing. But then I brought in a lot of my general counsel, other attorneys that specialized in constitutional authorities in our state, Constitution and also the U.S. Constitution, to find out really what my role was as governor. I recognized that I had authorities. I also recognized that, as laid out by the Constitution, there are some things I don't have the authority to do. And I wanted to go into this situation with eyes wide open and make sure that I was keeping my promises. So as I went forward, in South Dakota, I never closed any businesses. I didn't even define what an essential business was because I didn't believe I had the authority to tell a business they weren't essential. And then also just never issued a shelter in place or, mandated masking either. I just told my people that I was going to be honest with them, that the science and the data, the facts were changing. I was going to give them every bit of information that I had, and then I was going to trust them. And overwhelmingly, the people responded, and they trusted me, and we got through the beginning 6 months of this virus very well. We recognize we're not done with it yet, but I think what we've done here is pretty special and is an example to the nation, which is what I knew South Dakota could do all along.
Did you ever receive any pressure when you're doing things differently? I mean, I'm sure you know our governor here in Iowa, Kim Reynolds. She received all kinds of pressure from IHME at the University of Washington. She got phone calls from Anthony Fauci. She received a lot of pressure to kind of conform to the lockdown prevailing wisdom of the time. Did you receive that kind of pressure?
Oh, absolutely. If you remember, we had one of the first hot spots in the nation with the Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And that was really when we saw the pressure come. I saw it a lot from the liberal news media. I mean, it was unbelievable. Rachel Maddow and Elizabeth Warren went after me. And that's really probably how people really started to hear about me, was from the left coming after and attacking the decisions that I was making. But I think that, we knew that we ran for these positions and that there would be good days and that there would be hard days. I think what was, that was challenging for us was, I think Kim would say the same thing, that there's days that you feel a little lonely. I mean, your staff and your team is incredible, and they give you all the information in the world, and they give you their opinions on what you should do. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, you're the one who has to decide and live with the consequences. And that's kind of a scary thing on some of those days when you're dealing with a public health crisis like we have been facing.
There's been two, I think, existential arguments that we've been trying to navigate as a people this year. COVID is one of them. The other is, what's our legacy? What's our history? And then what does that tell us about what path we ought to chart moving forward? Are we, are we a fundamentally racist country? Or are we a country that has that was founded on fundamental virtues, that has a checkered history, and imperfect one, in trying to deploy and install them? But whenever we return to those fundamental virtues, it puts us on the right track. Or were we off on the wrong track from the very beginning? These paths are diverging right now, and a lot of what we're seeing happening in our streets, on social media, the unrest that we're seeing across the country. Yet it could not be lost that President Trump chose to give an Independence Day address there in your neck of the woods, and you were there with him in front of the country at Mount Rushmore, embracing the values and the legacy that this country was founded on. Tell us about that. Why you believe in that path?
Well, I don't believe that there was two different histories here. We may have people in this country today that from this point forward choose to take different paths, but our history is clear. We were founded on values and virtues and moral beliefs by people who were flawed, who made mistakes, but also people who stepped up in incredibly challenging times and did big things for our country to promote equality and freedom and personal responsibility. And so I don't think that our past can be debated at all. It is very clear. The facts are there. We just have to make sure that it's not erased by those who would choose to do that. From here, at this point forward, is really where this country needs to decide what they want to be. And I just realized several months ago that during my press conferences during this pandemic, it wasn't just my responsibility to stand up in front of the people and talk about the decisions I was making. I needed to tell them why I was making those decisions and what I believed, and to also reteach our history and make sure that I was educating them as to what I felt the Constitution said and what states' rights means, what federalism means, and also what we can do going forward to make sure that you don't have leaders overstepping their authority in a time of crisis. Because when you have that is when you lose your country. And that has been what has been, I think, a little scary for me, is just to watch leaders ignore that guiding. Because the Constitution's our foundation. And if we can keep an adherence to that really is what will sustain us for the next 200 years. But if we break that at this point in time, then I'm not certain as to what future holds for us.
Over the weekend, the local government in Washington, D.C. voted to remove a lot of that legacy that you're talking about. And that is in clear contrast to what you're calling your Capitol Freedom Project. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah, I'm excited about this. When the state capitol in South Dakota was built, there was 4 alcoves put on the outside of the dome that were prepared for statues to be placed there. At the time, I don't believe there was money for it, or it wasn't completed. And during all of this discussion of tearing down monuments, tearing down our history, we had been looking at those alcoves anyways and decided that now was the time to raise the money privately to put 4 statues of the 4 men that are on Mount Rushmore on our Capitol dome. I just believe that there's a point in time for us to set an example. And while the rest of the country is tearing down their monuments, tearing down their statues, that South Dakota will be putting them up and honoring people who led our country through challenging times. And each one of those men on Mount Rushmore is incredibly special to South Dakota, for reasons that is obvious to everybody. And so to honor them and put them on our dome at this point in time is even more important than it was previously.
What I find fascinating about this part of our conversation, Kristi, is I'm getting emails from listeners and viewers all over the country that are hearing from their local politicians, some of their local conservative politicians, some of their local churches. I just dealt with an email from somebody dealing with, sort of the idea that America is an inherently racist country in his own church. And there seems to be this temptation to say, maybe they've got a point. Maybe there's something to this, and we can kind of find some way to compromise with the civil unrest we're seeing play out in our streets. What I hear from you, though, is the answer to this challenge is to actually embrace the values and the founding and the legacy of the country, actually to embrace it even tighter, right? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, you do see instances and circumstances throughout the country where you could say racism was a part of that situation. But overwhelmingly, our country was a country that was founded by people and by values that wanted equality and everybody to have an opportunity to be successful, that fought to end racism decade after decade. So, and we perhaps have not pursued that enough to teach this generation about how important that is and the true truth of the history. I worked last 2 legislative sessions ago to get a civics bill put in so that our kids in high schools would be able to have more civics and history instruction while they were in their school districts. But, it was defeated by a Republican legislature. So hopefully this will stir people to realize that it's important that we know our history, that we build from that, and that we use that to learn and be teachable each day to be even better than those who came before us.
I've got about 90 seconds, Governor. If you were advising President Trump the final 60 days of this campaign, what one singular piece of advice would you give him?
Keep working. Don't stop. We need you. I really do truly believe that our way of life is in jeopardy. When you look at the policies Joe Biden has embraced, they will absolutely devastate this country and especially the Midwest. When you look at the tax increases he's proposing, his Green New Deal that he has embraced, eliminating fossil fuels, when you look at how he'll go after our Second Amendment rights, pro-choice, eliminate our sanctity of life values that we have, it is just over and over and over again what that party stands for today, the attack on law and order. That is not American. And so that is why I would tell the president, just keep speaking truth directly to the people and keep working. We need you.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, it's a pleasure to finally get you on the show. Kristi, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.